Hello, good to be with you today. I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit. I have a lot to cover, and we're going to look really at the entirety of where we've been for the last 2 weeks and now this week in conclusion of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And again, a book of deep thoughts, a book of wisdom. And we've really been wrestling from the beginning, and now in this conclusion, wrestling with elements of time. And to put it all together, I ask your indulgence. I want to just say a little about where we've been to understand where we're going. And I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can in the words. So let me just jump in. Do you wrestle with time? You know, time is all around us. As the chapter opened, we talked about the idea of seasons. I see the seasons quickly changing all around me. Sadly, my beloved fall is starting to turn, and I see a winter is just knocking on the door, and cold weather's in the forecast. And part of time is there are elements of it we cannot control. But these times and seasons have always been with us, even as they were at the time of Solomon and throughout time, and so they will be with us now. We secondarily have the wrestling of time as a human. And we come to the conclusion, we realize at a certain age that we don't live forever. And there is a time and season to our lives, and there's a cycle to that, and we deal with it. And then in those first 8 verses, we see 28 comparisons of time, songs written about it, even in recent times. And so these are things that we can relate to. They're universal things, and partly it points to in their beauty, a beautiful passage, but the immutability of God, and that there are things we cannot change. But this is something I really want us to center on today. There are things we can't change, but there are things we can change as we wrestle with this, and we have choices in how we view God and how we respond to time. That's just a very quick overview of the first lesson. Now, as we dive a little deeper still, we think about time in terms of work and gift, and we can reflect upon that there is a time to be born, and that we've been given the privilege of birth, and we've been given talents, and we've been given a window of time to be a steward of, even as we're a steward of financial resources. And we can see, even as Jesus taught the parable of stewardship, and it applies in that we have a time to be busy with upon earth, whatever time we are given. We also, as we think about time, our context is often very limited. And I'm going to have to be particularly brief on this compared to the length we could spend last week. But whether it be something as horrific as cancer, or dealing with a financial hardship, or COVID, if we could have the benefit of God's wisdom, God can turn anything. Even in limited context, it seems like it's the worst of times, but God can make everything absolutely beautiful in His proper time. And He's given us this ability, even what we're doing now, to wrestle with time and the idea of even what eternity represents, which is going to come into real play as we are going to turn to the conclusion today. But it's part of God's gift. He gives us simple thoughts as well in the time we're given to be joyful and to do good as long as we live. But we still have this wrestling with this idea of something unique that God has put in our hearts, which is the idea of eternity. But as we concluded last week, we can see that in terms of God's time, what He does is not vanity or a vapor. It is not some temporal passing, but what He does is eternal. It's the opposite of this notion of vanity, and it is complete, and nothing can be added to it. It is secure. It cannot be taken away, and God has done it. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to kind of bring us to the point we're at today. As we bring everything, all of this has really been thinking and wrestling about time, and I don't think I even saw in doing the first lesson exactly how all this was going to play out. Well, let's continue the lesson. We're going to conclude this chapter. Have you ever felt this way? And I am almost certain you have. It's, again, part of the universal condition. So he goes on and says, moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness even there was wickedness. And we can have this notion of the scales of justice, and we often feel like we look at the world and we don't see it. We see people that have committed evil. We perceive they've committed evil, and it doesn't seem like they are punished. Or at times maybe it's the opposite. We see people that we believe are righteous and we don't see that immediate reward. Again, that is also related to time. It's related to the temporal nature. We can't overly reflect upon just the short term. We have to think about this from the vantage point of the things that are eternal. Because even in all this, he says, and I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every matter and for every work. And understand this, that what we may perceive in the short term as we look at others, or if we examine our own heart, but there will eventually be a day of judgment. And that's something we could expand upon in a deep study that would include things such as Revelation and other books, and we're not going to get into all that. But we do know it's true that whatever we perceive in the short term, there will ultimately be a day which God and God only will judge the works of every person and every action and every government, whatever it may be. Now that can give us comfort if we feel like now there is a lack of justice, a lack of judgment. We can have comfort that it eventually will happen. But we can also have fear, because we have to remember this doesn't just apply to others, but it should apply to us. And so this is something else we have to wrestle with time, that this is in our future. We must all give account. And then this is something I really, I guess, ended up with a series of things that happened this week that caused me to reflect upon this quite a bit. And it's the idea of man and beast, or man amongst the animals. And earlier, saying you have made man unique, you put eternity in his heart. So he said, I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beast, or animals. Is man an animal? For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all its vanity. Well, there are good things to think about at this, but we also have to keep in mind that Solomon here is, we're seeing the insides of his soul as he is going through this wrestling match. So we're seeing this from his perspective. And then there's a famous phrase kind of going along with this thought, that all go to one place, all are from the dust, and to dust all return. And we know the phrase. I'm sure we've all been at a ceremony before where we've heard the phrase, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And there is that day, the day of reckoning that comes from us in our mortal bodies. And then in the conclusion, it's really an unsatisfactory conclusion here. We see him in the midst of his wrestling match with time. And he says, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth. So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? In other words, what is our eternal future? Are we different from the animal? God has put eternity in our heart. can we have hope, or do we just have to be satisfied with our lot? And so I want to take this just a little bit further and build upon this ending. And it's interesting how some things have come upon me this week to even give this some thought. And I'm going to, this last slide, say wrestling with time, man, and beast. Now, I'm going to share something I'd never heard of until this week. I actually came across an article about this book that was recently published called Playing Possum, How Animals Understand Death. And there is a whole study out there called the Study of Comparative Thonotology. Never ever heard of that before this week. And yet here as I'm studying Ecclesiastes and I'm wrestling and I'm thinking about the thoughts of man and beast and all this, I read a review of this and an in-depth article about this very topic and about the role of animals and man. But man is unique. You know, man is unique from the animals. Well, first, just the role of animals. Do you have a pet that you love? It's interesting how we, for example, in our family, we have a family dog, which we love. We say that can be man's best friend. And so we can have this loving relationship. For some, they might be dog people or cat people. We have animals like horses. Just think about our relationship with all these animals. We have zoos, and we can go. And I remember when we studied Job, and there's thinking about the creation of all the animals. And I love many animals. I love to go to zoos. I love to look at these things. But you know, even in this book of study, and I'm by no means endorsing it, I'm just saying it was an interesting thing that somebody has decided to write a book about. But I believe this part is true, that man is truly unique from the animals. And part of that is the understanding of death. You know, humans are unique in our language. Humans are unique from animals in being altruistic versus just so-called survival of the fittest. Sometimes we act like we're nothing but animals. That's how we can be tested. But we are also capable of being altruistic and being kind. Numeracy, the use of numbers, that we have a system of which we have an accounting of things. But it's also in the idea of death. Again, we're kind of wrestling with some deep philosophical thoughts here. Now, if we're wrestling with time and death, you know, and Solomon has this very unsatisfactory conclusion, there are some things, and this was actually all some thoughts in this book as well, but I believe in it. Humans are unique in that we have certain universal understandings. The causality of death, we know to a degree that there is a cause of death. There's an autopsy, they say, the cause. We know it's a universality in that it's going to happen to all of us, dust to dust. Nobody can escape it. That's something that is immutable or unchanging. And while there can be a causality, sometimes, though, there is an unpredictability. A person may try to control causes to avoid it, but then something like an accident can go beyond their control, so it's unpredictable. And we could even have a mortality table, but there's no way we can say for sure what's going to happen. And ultimately, it's personal. This is not just something theoretical. It's something that we all have to deal with. We're unique we are not the same as the beast. We have a comprehension, no matter who we are, what culture, what time. These are things that we have to wrestle with. Now, he says, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? But we can't know. And this is what I want to leave us with today. Yeah, there's some deep thoughts, and I've tried to handle them, as I said, as efficiently as I can, though they're really something quite ponderous to think about. But there is a solution. We do not have to look at this and feel like it's our lot to be hopeless and confused. And the answer that I want to just share succinctly here today is from 1 John 5:13. And he says, I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you may know, that you may know. He says, who knows? You may know. You have eternal life. These things are true. This mortal earth and this body will be dust to dust. We'll all have to give an account. Whatever has happened upon this earth, the day will come. And I'll tell you what, I know that I am guilty, but I claim this promise. And unlike where Solomon's at this moment in time in his wrestling match, I have reached a conclusion. And this is something I know, and I hope you will know as well. God has made us unique from the animals, and He has put eternity in our heart. And we do know that day of time will come. But we can know that beyond this veil of life, we have an eternal promise and an eternal hope, and that is why He gave us His Son. I hope that you will not be left with depression and vexation and confusion. I hope you won't say, who knows? I hope you will know, and I hope you'll claim this promise as your own.